about you every day, and yet your phone remains silent. No message, no call, no sign. And if you misunderstand what this silence truly means, you will spend your energy fighting an illusion, chasing clarity that cannot be forced, and slowly giving away your power to something that was never meant to control you. So listen carefully, because this silence is not empty. Silence is never empty. Silence is where truth gathers. When the noise fades, when distractions fall away, when there is nothing left to scroll, nothing left to post, nothing left to perform for, memory begins to speak. And memory does not speak gently. It speaks honestly. She remembers you not when she is surrounded by people, not when she is laughing loudly, not when she is posting carefully curated moments meant for the world to see. She remembers you in the quiet moments, in the pause before sleep, in the stillness of rooms that once felt alive, in the subtle ache that arrives when the mind has nowhere left to run. Memories do not disappear when people walk away. They settle, they deepen, they become heavier with time. She remembers how you made her feel without effort, how your presence felt grounded instead of restless, how she could be herself without calculating every word, how being around you felt like exhaling after holding her breath for too long. Those impressions do not fade, they embed. She watches from a distance she pretends not to care about. She notices changes she does not acknowledge. She wonders what version of you exists now, beyond her reach. But she does not reach out. Not because she feels nothing, but because reaching out would expose something she is not ready to face. Here is a truth that changes how you see people forever. Most humans do not fear rejection nearly as much as they fear self-revelation. To reach out is not just to risk hearing no. It is to admit uncertainty, to admit longing, to admit that control has slipped. And control is the illusion most people cling to when they feel vulnerable. So she stays silent, and in her silence, she tells herself a story where restraint equals strength, where distance equals dignity, where whoever breaks first loses something invisible but essential. This story is comforting. It protects her pride. It allows her to believe she is composed, unaffected, in control. But comfort is not wisdom. Inside her mind, a quiet tension grows. One part of her is pulled toward depth, toward what felt real, toward the version of herself that did not need to perform or impress. Another part of her is pulled toward pride, toward maintaining image, toward the safety of emotional distance. Pride often wins at first. Pride is loud. Pride is persuasive. Pride feels powerful in the short term. But pride has a weakness. It cannot tolerate uncertainty for long. Here is a pearl of wisdom that few people ever articulate clearly. Pride avoids pain temporarily, but guarantees confusion later. Silence, when shared between two people, never remains neutral. It becomes a force, a test, a mirror. And mirrors are dangerous because mirrors do not flatter. They reveal. When you do not reach out, when you do not chase, when you do not try to force reassurance, something subtle begins to happen. At first, she feels safe, then curious, then unsettled. Because silence removes feedback, and without feedback, control dissolves. She begins to wonder, quietly. And quiet questions are the ones that linger longest. What if he's moved on? What if I mattered less than I believed? What if I misjudged his value? What if I lost something rare? These questions do not scream. They whisper, and whispers echo longer than shouts. Here is another truth most men never learn. Certainty feels comfortable, but uncertainty sustains desire. The moment you reach out, you collapse uncertainty. You resolve the tension. You give answers, and answers end imagination. But imagination is where longing lives. Pressure, though uncomfortable, is productive. It forces reflection. It forces reevaluation. It forces growth or regret. If you reach out too soon, you relieve her of that pressure. You offer reassurance where discomfort was doing its work. You give her relief before understanding is formed, and relief is not attraction. Respect is. Silence chosen from strength is not avoidance. It is alignment. It says, without words, I trust myself enough not to chase reassurance. I value my peace more than temporary relief. I do not abandon my dignity to be chosen. This kind of silence changes how you see yourself. And when self-perception changes, external perception always follows. You may see her smiling online, traveling, posting affirmations about healing, independence, and strength. Do not confuse presentation with peace. Most people curate happiness because they cannot sustain it internally. Public confidence often compensates for private doubt. Noise often masks emptiness. Constant movement often avoids stillness. Stillness is where truth lives. When the room grows quiet, when the phone dims, when there is nothing left to distract the mind, memory returns, comparison forms, absence becomes noticeable. She remembers the way you listened without trying to fix her, the way you didn't rush her thoughts, the way you were present without needing to be validated. These memories become reference points, and reference points create contrast. Contrast creates absence. Absence creates gravity. Here is another pearl of wisdom. People do not miss presence. They miss how presence made them feel about themselves. If you reach out during this stage, you interrupt gravity. You turn mystery into availability. You turn depth into predictability. Predictability kills longing. This is not cruelty. This is human psychology. The man who does not need to explain his worth retains it. The man who rushes to prove it erodes it. Stillness preserves frame. Impulse collapses it. Most men lose power not because they care, but because they panic when caring feels unanswered. They rush to fill silence. They rush to seek reassurance. They rush to regain certainty. And in rushing, they abandon themselves. Stillness, by contrast, builds something rare: inner authority. When you do not react, you become unpredictable. When you become unpredictable, attention shifts toward you. Not because you demanded it, but because absence invites interpretation. Interpretation fuels imagination. Imagination fuels desire. She does not miss men who remain accessible. She does not lie awake wondering about men who constantly make themselves known. She remembers the man who disappeared into his own direction. The man who did not beg. The man who did not argue for his worth. Absence does not erase identity, it distills it. Here is a Stoic truth older than modern psychology. You cannot control attachment, only conduct. You cannot control longing, only alignment. When you act in alignment with self-respect, outcomes become secondary. This silence begins to change you. At first, it feels uncomfortable, then unfamiliar, then clarifying. You learn that not every urge deserves obedience. Not every thought requires action. Not every emotion must be expressed. This is emotional mastery. And emotional mastery separates men who react from men who lead. Here is a reflection worth carrying. If something leaves your life, and your peace leaves with it, the attachment was stronger than the connection. Letting go does not diminish you. Clinging does. At some point, perhaps weeks or months from now, she will think of you again. Not with certainty, but with curiosity. Not with comfort, but with tension. Why didn't he chase? Why didn't he reach out? Why does his absence feel heavier than others' presence? These questions do not need answers. They linger, and lingering questions shape memory. But by then, something more important has already happened. You are no longer waiting. You are no longer scanning signs. You are no longer outsourcing your worth. You are building. A man who masters silence masters patience. A man who masters patience masters direction. A man who masters direction builds a life immune to emotional volatility. The strongest position is not being desired. It is being complete without needing to be. When you reach that state, silence no longer feels threatening. It feels spacious, grounded, clean. You move forward without resentment, without bitterness, without explanation, and in doing so, you become someone whose absence is felt without effort. Stay silent, not to provoke, not to punish, not to manipulate, but to remain loyal to your own growth. Silence is not emptiness. It is the space where strength matures. And once you fully inhabit that space, you are no longer reacting to life. You are shaping it. That is Stoic power. And once it settles into you, the world adjusts around it. She still hasn't reached out. And now, something important has changed. Not in her world first, but in yours. Because silence, when held long enough, stops being about restraint and starts becoming revelation. At first, silence feels like absence. Then it feels like resistance. And finally, if you stay with it, it becomes clarity. Most people never stay long enough to reach that point. They panic in the early stages. They mistake discomfort for danger. They assume that if something feels heavy, it must be wrong. But wisdom has always required endurance. Here is a truth rarely spoken. Growth does not arrive as motivation. It arrives as discomfort you refuse to escape. In the quiet you are now inhabiting, something inside you is recalibrating. You are no longer reacting to her behavior. You are no longer measuring your worth through her attention. You are beginning to experience something unfamiliar to most men: inner stillness. And inner stillness is dangerous, not to you, but to illusions. Silence removes the false urgency that once drove you, the constant need to be seen, the impulse to explain yourself, the desire to be chosen in order to feel complete. What remains, when all of that fades, is truth. And truth is rarely flattering at first. You begin to see how much energy you once gave away, how often you bent yourself to maintain connection, how easily your peace depended on another person's response. This is not self-criticism. This is awakening. Most men never realize how reactive they are until they stop reacting. Most men never realize how loud their inner noise is until they sit in silence long enough for it to quiet. And when it does, something remarkable happens. Your perception sharpens. You start noticing how people behave when they are no longer being chased, how attention shifts when it is no longer guaranteed, how dynamics change when you remove yourself as the stabilizing force. She may still watch, she may still wonder, but what matters now is this. You are no longer available in the same way, not emotionally, not mentally, not energetically. This is where real power begins. Here is another pearl of wisdom. Power is not control over others. It is freedom from being controlled. When silence matures, it stops being effortful. You are no longer holding back. You simply do not feel the pull anymore. Not because you are numb, but because you are centered. This is the difference between suppression and mastery. Suppression is force. Mastery is ease. You are not forcing yourself to stay silent now. You understand why silence exists, and that understanding makes it natural. At this stage, something subtle happens in her mind as well. The narrative she once relied on, the one where you would eventually reach out, begins to weaken, because time has passed, and time without contact sends a message words never could. It says, "He is not orbiting me. He is not waiting. He is not suspended." And this destabilizes the ego, because the ego feeds on predictability. When someone behaves as expected, the ego rests. When someone deviates from expectation, the ego questions itself. This is where doubt deepens, not loud doubt, quiet doubt, the kind that surfaces when distractions fail. She begins to replay not just memories, but decisions. Not just what you shared, but what she walked away from. Here is a deeper truth. Regret does not come from loss alone. It comes from realizing the loss was unnecessary. And that realization cannot be rushed. It must be earned through silence. But listen carefully now. This part is crucial. If she never reaches out, if silence remains permanent, that does not mean silence failed. It means silence completed its true purpose, which was never to bring her back. It was to bring you back to yourself. Here is a wisdom most men discover too late. The greatest relationships you will ever have are impossible to sustain if you have not first learned how to stand alone. Silence teaches you that. It teaches you that you are capable of holding discomfort without collapsing, that you can experience longing without being ruled by it, that you can let someone go without losing yourself. These are not small lessons. These are foundational. This is why Stoics valued restraint so deeply, not because they rejected emotion, but because they understood emotion must be governed, not obeyed. A man who obeys every feeling is not free. He is reactive. A man who observes his feelings without surrendering to them is sovereign, and sovereignty changes how the world responds to you. You begin to move differently. You speak less, but with more weight. You explain less, but carry more presence. You seek less validation, and therefore receive more respect. People feel this, even without words, even without contact. Energy does not require proximity to be felt.
At this stage, you may notice something unexpected.
The silence that once felt heavy
Now feels clean, simple.
You are no longer waiting for something to happen. You are becoming someone. You begin investing that reclaimed energy into your body, your work, your discipline, your craft. Not out of desperation, but out of alignment. You are no longer building to be noticed. You are building because building is who you are now. And this is where identity shifts. You stop seeing yourself as the man who lost someone. You start seeing yourself as the man who chose himself.
That shift is irreversible. Here is another pearl of wisdom.
Once you choose yourself without resentment, you cannot go back to self-betrayal. If she were to reach out now,
It would meet a different man.
not colder, not bitter, but grounded. A man who does not need the interaction to mean anything. A man who can respond or not, from choice, not compulsion.
And that is the final form of power. Not silence as absence.
Silence as independence.
Whether she returns or not, the outcome is the same. You are no longer chasing.
You are no longer proving. You are no longer waiting.
You are moving forward with intention, and intention shapes destiny.
Here is the final reflection of this journey. What left your life was never meant to define it. What stayed within you, discipline, clarity, restraint, is what builds it. Silence did not take anything from you. It returned something. Your time, your focus, your authority over yourself. Most people will never understand this. They will rush to fill quiet moments. They will cling to attention. They will fear being alone. But you will know something they don't. That silence, when embraced fully, is not loneliness. It is leadership. And once you embody that, you do not need to be remembered. You are impossible to forget. That is the end of part 2. And it is the beginning of who you are becoming.